wasn't looking for Tartaria when I found it. I wasn't looking for empires or erased civilizations or forbidden maps. I was looking at a day, May 19th, 1780, a date that appears ordinary in history books, a footnote at best, a curiosity, and yet something about it refuses to stay quiet, because on that day, the sky went black, not dim, not overcast, not storm dark, black. Midday collapsed into night across New England. Candles were lit at noon. Farms fell silent. Animals returned to their shelters as if summoned by instinct older than reason. People stood still, unsure what they were witnessing, unsure whether the sun would return. This was not fear in the modern sense. There were no explanations ready at hand, no experts to consult, only observation, only memory. In Connecticut, the legislature convened as usual, then adjourned, not because of debate, but because the members could not see one another across the room. That detail matters. History tells us what happened next. It always does. We are told it was smoke, forest fires, distant burning carried by unusual winds. A natural occurrence. Rare, perhaps, but explainable. And for most people, that is where the story ends. But there is a problem here. Smoke behaves in familiar ways. It drifts. It gathers. It thins. It carries smell. It stains the air slowly. This darkness did none of that. Contemporary witnesses did not describe a gradual dimming. They described arrival, like a curtain drawn, like a wall advancing. Timothy Dwight, who would later become president of Yale, wrote that the darkness was as uncommon in its manner as in its depth. Not settling, not gathering, arriving. Others noticed something else, something more difficult to name. At the edges of the darkness, where light still resisted, the air appeared coppered, brass-colored, as if the world itself had been scorched, not burned. That night, when the moon rose, it did not glow silver. It appeared red, blood red through the remaining haze. This was not a storm. There was no rain, no thunderhead, no wind, just silence and wrongness. Animals behaved strangely, not merely as if night had fallen, but as if something deeper had shifted. Samuel Williams of Harvard attempted to measure the event, not its cause, its reach. He concluded that the darkness extended across more than 150,000 square miles. That is not a local fire. That is not a village phenomenon. That is a region holding its breath. And still, we are told not to linger on it, because history prefers answers that close doors, not questions that open them. The dark day is remembered as an oddity, a curiosity, an atmospheric footnote. But footnotes have a way of pointing elsewhere. And this one sits at a strange crossroads. Because when you look closely at the years surrounding 1780, other things begin to shift. Quietly, systematically. Maps change, not gradually, but through disappearance. Names that had existed for centuries begin to fade. And once you notice that, it becomes difficult to look away. Maps are honest in a way stories are not. They do not persuade. They record. Or at least, they are supposed to. When a name appears on a map for centuries, across languages, across empires, across printing houses, it carries weight. It suggests continuity, agreement, shared recognition. For hundreds of years, one name appeared again and again. Tartaria, Tartary, sometimes Grand Tartary. The spelling shifted. The presence did not. It stretched across Central and Northern Asia, from the edges of Europe to the Pacific. A vast, undefined space, yes, but not an empty one. Medieval maps marked it. Renaissance maps preserved it. Enlightenment-era cartographers still printed it without hesitation. Dutch, French, British, Russian. Different rivals. Same word. And then something unusual happens. After 1780, the name begins to thin. Not erased in one stroke. Not declared obsolete. It simply fades. Edition by edition. Atlas by atlas. By 1820, it is barely present. By 1850, it is gone. As if it had never existed. This is not how cartography normally works. Mapmakers argued with one another. They annotated changes. They cited explorers, travelers, missionaries, merchants. Corrections were explained. Borders were debated. But here, there is no debate. No announcement. No scholarly dispute. Just absence. We are told this was progress. Improved knowledge. Better surveys. Proper political distinctions. The Russian Empire. The Qing territories. New administrative names. But that explanation leaves something unanswered. Why did a term used for centuries vanish without record? Why was there no transitional language? No formerly known as? No acknowledgement that something had changed? A name does not disappear unless it has lost its meaning, or unless its meaning has become inconvenient. And this shift happens in a narrow window of time, within a single generation. The same generation that witnessed the Dark Day. The same generation that watched old orders dissolve and new narratives form. 1776. A declaration. A beginning. 1780. A darkness. After that, the world reorganizes itself. New nations appear. New histories are written. New explanations take hold. And maps follow. What had once been a vast, unified region becomes a patchwork of claims. Administrative, imperial, fragmented. We are encouraged to see this as refinement, as maturity. But refinement usually leaves traces of what came before. Here, there is silence. No chronicled conquest. No recorded absorption of a population large enough to occupy such territory. Just replacement. This raises a quiet question. Not dramatic. Not accusatory. Simply uncomfortable. If Tartaria was never real, why was it everywhere? And if it was real, why did it vanish so completely, so quickly, and so quietly? The dark day darkened the sky. The maps darkened memory. And both are explained away with remarkable efficiency. Perhaps coincidence. Perhaps correction. Or perhaps something passed out of view. Something not destroyed stone by stone, but forgotten line by line. Because history does not always erase with violence. Sometimes it erases with ink. And once the name is gone, the questions stop forming. After the maps change, the buildings begin to speak. Not all at once. Not loudly. They speak through presence. Massive structures appear across the world in the decades following 1780. Not ruins. Not experiments. Finished buildings. Courthouses. Exhibition halls. Capitals. Stations. Libraries. Built of stone. Balanced. Measured. They follow rules older than the nations that claim them. Columns placed with ritual precision. Domes rising to proportions that feel memorized rather than calculated. Symmetry that suggests inheritance, not innovation. We are told this is revival, a fashion. But fashion does not explain coordination. The same architectural language appears in places that had no reason to share one. San Francisco, Melbourne, Chicago, St. Petersburg, colonial outposts, frontier cities, recovering towns, And yet they raise buildings that rival ancient capitals. We are told they were built quickly, with limited tools, by unnamed workers. This is where the record becomes thin. There are photographs of finished halls, grand openings, ceremonies. There are very few images of construction, no quarries bustling with labor, no supply lines documented for millions of tons of stone, no detailed accounts of how foundations were laid, how domes were raised, how precision was achieved at scale. Instead, there are plaques, dates, names, declarations of ownership. We built this. We completed it. We claim it. The language is ceremonial, not technical, as if the important thing was attribution, not process. In older traditions, builders signed their work with craft. Masons left marks. Here, the marks are absent. What remains is architecture without ancestry. And this pattern repeats. Across continents, across cultures, across political systems that were supposedly isolated from one another. The buildings do not argue. They do not speculate. They stand. Their permanence contrasts sharply with the fragility of the stories wrapped around them. Wooden narratives surrounding stone realities. And always, the dates cluster. 1800, 1810, 1830. The inheritance period. A time when nations were young, but infrastructure appeared ancient. A time when cities claimed sudden maturity. And still, the question is avoided. Were these structures truly built then? Or were they already there, waiting to be named? History prefers the first answer because it flatters progress. It celebrates speed. It praises ingenuity. The second answer requires humility. It requires admitting that something existed before us. Something capable. Something organized. Something lost. If Tartaria was merely a word, then the buildings are coincidence. If Tartaria was something more, then these structures are remnants. Not of conquest, but of survival. Stone outlasting memory, and memory being rewritten to catch up. The dark day marked a sky turning black. What followed marked cities being claimed, not built, claimed. And once claimed, explained. If these buildings were inherited, not constructed, then something else must be true. They were empty. Not abandoned in decay. Not ruined by war. Empty in the quiet way a house is empty after its owners never return. This is the part history rarely lingers on. Cities do not simply appear without people, and people do not vanish without leaving traces. Yet in the decades after 1780, vast territories are absorbed with astonishing ease. No prolonged resistance, no drawn-out assimilation, no detailed accounts of cultural integration. Empires expand into silence. Russian frontiers push east. European powers divide distant lands. American settlement accelerates westward. All of it framed as discovery, as progress, as destiny. But discovery usually involves encounter. Here, the encounters are strangely muted. No chronicles describing the meeting of advanced urban populations. No records of mass displacement. No lingering languages folded into the dominant tongues. Instead, we are told the land was sparse, underdeveloped, waiting. And yet the cities contradict that story. Stone foundations sunk deeper than necessity. Infrastructure laid with foresight, not improvisation. Layouts that assume long continuity. This suggests a population that expected to remain. So where did they go? Not over centuries. Not gradually. Within a generation. Maps change. Names vanish. Ownership is reassigned. The transition is administrative, not violent on paper, which may be the strangest detail of all, because violence leaves records. Treaties, wars, rebellions. Here there is paperwork without conflict. a handover without witnesses, and the dark day returns to the edge of the frame. A moment when the sky itself seemed to register disturbance, when animals reacted before people could reason, when daylight failed without warning. Afterward, the world reorganizes. New narratives stabilize. Old questions fall out of use. What follows feels less like rebuilding and more like occupation. Cities are renamed. Buildings are repurposed. Functions are reassigned. A palace becomes a courthouse. A hall becomes a station. A structure meant for permanence is fitted to new habits. The stones do not resist. They endure. And endurance can be misread as origin. If you arrive late enough, inheritance looks like creation. History, written by those who arrive, rarely distinguishes between the two. The absence of people becomes proof they were never there. The absence of records becomes proof nothing was lost. But absence can also be engineered. Silence can be maintained, especially when the world is busy redefining itself. The late 18th century was not just an age of revolutions. It was an age of forgetting. And forgetting, once normalized, feels like truth. The years after the dark day do not return to normal. They fracture. 1783. A strange haze settles over Europe. A dry fog, observers call it. The sun appears dim. The air feels wrong. 1784. Cold arrives out of season. Crops fail. Rivers behave unpredictably. 1785. Accounts speak of red moons, unnatural twilights, ash falling from clear skies. History separates these events. Different causes, different explanations. A volcanic eruption in Iceland, unusual weather, local disasters. Each answer neat, contained. But lived experience is rarely so tidy. To the people who endured these years, the world did not feel fragmented into isolated incidents. It felt unsettled. Seasons lost their rhythm. The sky lost its reliability. Old patterns no longer held. In pre-modern understanding, this mattered deeply. The sky was not background. It was instruction, calendar, authority. When the sky behaved strangely, it was not dismissed. It was read. These generations did not think in terms of abstract climate systems. They thought in terms of balance. Harmony disrupted. Something had gone wrong. And this is where the official story grows thin. Because if these were unrelated natural events, why do they cluster so tightly? Why did they sit so close to the disappearance of old names, old maps, old certainties? Why does the period from 1780 to 1785 feel like a hinge, not a sequence? History insists on separation because separation reduces meaning. A fire here, a volcano there, a frost elsewhere. No pattern, no narrative. But patterns exist whether we acknowledge them or not. A civilization collapsing would not announce itself with a single moment. It would ripple. Through atmosphere, through agriculture, through migration, through memory. The sky would carry debris. The climate would respond. People would move. Records would break. And those who came after would inherit not clarity, but fragments. Fragments are easier to reorganize than wholes. If something ended in these years, it did not leave behind a signpost. It left behind confusion. Confusion is fertile ground. It allows new explanations to take root, new authorities to define reality. By the time the skies cleared, the maps were already changing. By the time seasons normalized, the names were already gone. And the buildings remained, silent witnesses to a continuity that history refuses to recognize. The dark day was not an ending by itself. It was a signal. A moment when the world briefly revealed that something fundamental had shifted. After that, forgetting accelerated. And forgetting, once complete, Looks like it was always meant to be that way. History assures us that nothing essential was lost. That progress moved forward. That knowledge accumulated. That each generation stood on the shoulders of the last. And yet, when we look around, we are surrounded by things we cannot fully explain. Buildings we admire but cannot replicate with the same patience. Stonework that assumes time we no longer grant ourselves. Urban layouts that feel composed, not optimized. We live inside answers we did not arrive at ourselves. The official timeline asks us not to notice this, to believe that speed replaced understanding. That industry replaced craft. That explanation replaced memory. But something feels reversed. The past appears more deliberate than the present, more aligned, more certain of its place in the world. If Tartaria was only a word, then its disappearance is trivial. If it was a civilization, then its absence is profound. Either way, the silence around it is real. No serious inquiry into where the people went. No sustained effort to trace continuity. No curiosity proportionate to the scale of what vanished. Instead, dismissal, a geographic term, a misunderstanding, nothing to see. The dark day remains treated the same way. An odd afternoon, smoke in the air. A story for almanacs. But stories that survive do so because they carry weight. This one has not faded because it was insignificant. It has faded because it was inconvenient. I cannot prove that Tartaria fell in the 1780s. I cannot prove that the darkness marked the end of a world. What I can say is this. Maps changed without explanation. Architecture appeared without ancestry. Atmospheric disturbances clustered without context. And all of it happened within the span of a single human lifetime. That is not how history usually moves. When civilizations rise or fall, echoes remain. Languages persist. Rituals survive. Borders blur slowly. Here, the erasure is abrupt, too clean. Which leaves us with a choice. We can accept the official story because it is comfortable. Or we can sit with the discomfort of unanswered questions. Questions that do not accuse. They simply wait. What existed before the names changed? Who built the cities we inherited? What knowledge was lost when the sky went dark? Stone still stands. Maps still whisper. And silence, when listened to closely, speaks. The dark day was May 19th, 1780. The sky went black, and when it cleared, the world remembered itself differently.